also had Carrie Pickell, Kyle's wife, come.
Start over. I was like mid-look at my book.
Morgan's like. Okay, so tonight we had our second book club for at Seed Coffee and for Seed International, and it was all about understanding your context, which is really, really important with any kind of poverty alleviation, community development work, is understanding the people that you're working with and the context in which their lives exist, because if you go into that blind, you can very easily do more harm than actual helping. One of the most helpful diagrams that was shown tonight is this kind of line graphing, which we'll put on the screen, but it kind of shows the three areas of the different types of poverty alleviation work. And so those are relief, rehabilitation, and development. So relief work is really focused on stopping the pain that is caused from crisis. So what were some examples that we gave in class today of like crisis that happened that cause relief work to be applicable?
I think the most common one that we think of is probably natural disasters. We also talked about abuse, job loss, and things out of your control, like maybe your house caught on fire, flooded, things like that.
And these kinds of situations obviously require immediate relief, but one of the things that Kyle said tonight was, how do you spell relief? You spell it IMMEDIATE. So it's immediate and it's temporary. It's not something that's meant to continue on. The next one is rehabilitation, and with rehabilitation, it's really that line as they're kind of coming back up out of that drop of crisis and back to more of a point of stability. And in rehabilitation work, the people are often pretty involved in that process. They're kind of able to get back up off their feet. They aren't in like an immediate emergency situation, and they're just really trying to get back where they started.
And we talked about that being the mentality of that is to do it with and not for. So we've moved a little bit further up the spectrum to be able to come alongside people instead of doing things for them.
Exactly. And that leads into the third one, which is development work, which really the goal would be to kind of even elevate them over where they even started. So it's kind of this long-term plan of creating change and, again, walking alongside people to really help them live into God's greatest intent for their lives.
Yeah. We also went into a case study where a church they had heard from one of their church members that worked in a community, she was a teacher there, that she was noticing that people needed help with immediate needs. So things like food and rent assistance and just the kind of immediate things that come along. And so the church jumped into action and they were like, okay, let's do this. Let's provide for these people. And one of the stories that we looked at was a single mom named Leah who signed up for the program. She had heard about it from someone else, and immediately when she went in, they asked for her ID and gave her what she needed, sent her on her way without really asking questions. She continued to go because she did need the assistance, but she realized that she was talking to a different person every time. They weren't really asking anything about her life or anything about why she was in this position, and it felt to her like very isolating and that she was not really gaining much even though they were providing for her financial needs. And so we talked about the brokenness that exists in those relationships and also the ways that the church could have maybe done things better. And one of the ways is just asking the questions and getting to know the community before jumping into action. And also looking back at last week, we talked about the definition of poverty, and we realized that this church really defined poverty by the lack of material possessions. And when we look at the context of poverty, there's so much more that's going on, and there's so many systemic issues that are happening. So we need to ask the right questions. We need to be invested in the people who we are wanting to help, and really doing some more introspective work before we just jump into action with the things that we think might solve their problems.
That's great. Yeah, and to kind of like wrap up this section, a point that Kyle really drove home tonight is that majority of the time relief work is not necessary. And I think that is kind of a rewiring we need to have in our brains, because a lot of times when we're introduced to community development, it is through the lens of relief work. But he gave a stat, and it's that 90% of poverty is not caused because of crisis. And really, relief work is intended only for those moments of crisis. And rehabilitation and development doesn't require that kind of immediate assistance. And you're actually going to do more harm than good if you lean too far into meeting those basic needs instead of allowing people to help themselves and to come alongside them in other ways rather than just meeting needs that they can meet themselves.
Definitely. Yes. And the question that he continued to ask and kind of prompt us to think about is, are we doing things for others that they could do for themselves? And to kind of flip that into a statement, if we're doing those things, then that's not the right thing to do. We should always be equipping them to do things that themselves and allowing them to be the hero of the story and not ourselves.
Yeah. We also had Carrie Pickell, Kyle's wife, come and join us tonight, and she works for Restoration House here in Knoxville. And it was really cool to hear about this organization. They are a development organization, so they really are trying to lean into that and make sure that they're not stepping into areas of relief or even rehabilitation work, that they're really focusing in on what they can do well and not trying to do it all. I think that's something we have to remember. But a piece that really stood out to me from that is this idea of giving people dignity. And so Carrie had shared the example of there's a local church that had, said, we've raised money and we want to be able to buy all the kids in your organization Christmas presents. And Restoration House had to say, no, that's actually we appreciate it, that's really generous, but that's not what we do. And she gave an alternative. What they've done in the past is even open up a Christmas market where the families, the single mothers that are part of this organization, can come and shop for gifts for their children, but they're paying for it. They're having a dignified way of providing for their children, providing Christmas gifts. And so it's all these little mindset shifts that you have to do to see what poverty alleviation looks like through the lens of helping and not hurting.
And they did talk about how good intentions are often where the biggest mistakes lie. And so it's not out of people trying to do things for a bad reason, but it's because we have these good intentions, our heart gets involved, our emotions get involved, and that's when mistakes get made. And so we really have to sit back and think about the repercussions of our actions before we just jump in and do something. And like Abby said, the church, they wanted to help, and they thought this would be a good idea. Kids need gifts for Christmas, but they didn't think about what that was doing to the dignity of those single moms and what that was doing for the kids long term, thinking that someone outside of their family was the answer to their problems. They need to be looking to their mothers. And so as a church or as an organization, we need to be lifting up the mothers and seeing how we can provide, or well, maybe not even provide dignity, but help to encourage them to have dignity for themselves.
Mm-hmm.